Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I am Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. And this week is episode number 199, one episode away from the magical 200 number in which I get magical powers of LitRPG-ness. At least that's what my friends and relatives tell me. This week I have 8 new reviews for you folks at home. A few from me, a few from our contributor, Ian Mitchell. But first, we're going to talk about some of the ones we're going to be reviewing this week. That includes Excise, a post-apocalyptic LitRPG Ether Collapse book number 2 from the good folks at Mountain Dome Press. Also, Avatar of Light, Interworld Network book number 2 is going to be reviewed, as is The Card Job, a LitRPG Heist, and The System Apocalypse, short story anthology, volume 1. And last is going to be Awaken Online Ember, Tarot number 1. Plus, we're going to have, of course, a good number of reviews from contributor Ian Mitchell and Ian's picks of the week. But before getting into any of that, we're of course going to talk about some LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we only got a couple stories this week, but they're both really good. And one includes Sound Booth Theater. They had a very entertaining Facebook live stream this last week. It's kind of celebrating the end of the year. I think it might have been their anniversary as a company, but that is ton of guests, including some of your favorite LitRPG authors and authors. Definitely go check it out. It's a nice long stream of people drinking and being funny and saying sometimes inappropriate things, but very entertaining things still. We'll have a link in the show notes for you to go go directly to the video on their Facebook page. On other LitRPG news, just also remind you that the Gameless Society is doing their annual charity drive on GoFundMe for the Shriners Hospital for Children. So far, they've raised $1,000 of their $3,000 goal. Go donate if you want to give it to a good cause. There are several authors who are offering some rewards, running some contests to help people, encourage people to donate their money to the cause. I personally, and the podcast, donate every year. I love Shriners Hospital and the work that they do in working with children on medical issues without asking for money back necessarily. So it's always a great cause. Full nonprofit organization. So a worthy cause for you to give some dollars to. That's it for LitRPG news. Like I said, it's a short news week, but we have some new stuff that's come out this week. Haven't had a chance to read it, and that includes The Wave of Deception Royal Card book number 2. Remember, this is a re-release of the existing series. It was released with similar cover art before, but this time it has better editing. So if you read the first version and you could not stand it because of the translation issues, because it is a Western translation, this time the translation is much better. We reviewed the first book in the series when it was relaunched, and it was so much better, so much more readable, and book 2 is just as readable. So definitely go check that out if you enjoyed the re-release of that first book. Also out now is Raven, Player Killer, World of Veil, book number 2. The second book in the Scourge War series, Adapt, is out. I enjoyed book number 1. Haven't had a chance to read book number 2 though. Also out is Battlefield, Evolution, LitRPG. In new LitRPG audiobooks, we got some new stuff for you too, including Into the Hells, Axe Druid, book number 3. Transformation, which is a Russian translation LitRPG story. Also actually narrated by the folks at Sound Booth Theater. So I'm really surprised that they got a Russian author. They grabbed him for audiobooks. So good for them. I enjoyed that book as an ebook. Also out now is Reading Online, Absolution, the Alchemic Weaponer, book number 2, which is a side series for one of the main VGO characters. So definitely go listen to that if you have a chance. And VapQuest has an audiobook, which is super surprising, considering I think it has 3 reviews since it was released, probably about a good year ago. But there is an audiobook for it. I would recommend that you listen to the sample for this first, though. I gave it a listen just curious as to who was narrating it, and it's an interesting choice. Just saying. Give it a listen, and always listen to an audiobook sampling before you go and purchase it. Also out as an audiobook is, again, surprising, 12 Evolutions, Humanity's Potential 12 Evolutions, book number 1. I actually enjoyed this as an ebook. I was just surprised that it becomes an audiobook because, again, didn't really seem to do that well on sales, but maybe they do a royalty share with the narrator. Either way, always, again, check out the sampling for these stories before you purchase in case in case you have issues with the narrator, and that's always the case with an audiobook. In upcoming LitRPG, this just where I read a bunch of stuff that I know is coming out in the near future, and just we have some new additions here, but feel free to skip ahead of it to the reviews. On November the 8th, just the end of this week, it'll be Kaiju Battlefield Surgent, a LitRPG adventure written by the award-winning author, Matt Dinniman. So, and it actually says on the bottom, the same dude who wrote Dominion of Blades. Super funny. This one's actually been in the works for, I know, over a year. So I'm excited to read it when it comes out. Also, on November the 8th is Essence, a Divine Dungeon Anthology, which is a short story collection set in the Divine Dungeon universe. On November the 8th as well will be The Culling of Man, a LitRPG adventure. On November the 14th, it'll be Delvers LLC, another short story collection, this time set, of course, in the Delvers LLC universe, called Surviving Ludus. On November the 15th, it'll be Prime Verse Force Login. On November the 15th as well, it'll be Dodge Evoborn, book number 3. On November the 17th, a new series in the Realm of Archon universe called Stranger Among Strangers, Dark Covenant, book number 1. On November the 19th, it'll be the 4th book in the Arcane Lion King series called Death March. So that's a popular series. November 22nd, the 2nd book in the Chronicles of Ethan, Hard Mode, will be out. On November 29th, it'll be Axiom, a Divine Dungeon series, Arthurian Archives, book number 1. I'm super curious about this, to be honest, because it is set in the Divine Dungeon universe, but it's not written by Dakota Rout. It's written by an entirely different author, so I'm kind of curious to see how this does. This is actually one of the authors who's also doing a short story in the Divine Dungeon Anthology, which comes out on Friday. So we'll see, might get a peek at this book in that one. Out on November the 30th, it'll be Darkness Conquered, Darkness Online, book number 3. December the 1st, the 8th book in the System Apocalypse series, Rebel Star, will be out. On December the 3rd, it will be Lost in Game, Dream State Saga, book number 4. On December the 5th, it'll be Downtime and Death, Apocalypse Gate, book number 5. On December the 9th, it'll be Level Up Update, Knockout, book number 2. December the 10th, this was actually a novel that shifted dates from November the 10th to December the 10th. Last Time Loop, book number 1. December the 13th, Quest for Justice, Hero Online, book number 3. The 7th book in the Good Guy series will be out on December the 14th, The Bear Hunt. Actually, I keep forgetting to delete this picture. December the 20th, it'll be Karma's Touch, a LitRPG and Gilded Fantasy series, Chronicles of Ethan, book number 3. December 23rd, with The Waste, Underdog, book number 2. January the 9th, 2020, will be out The Destroying Plague, Discardium, book number 3. Actually, read the series. Dragon Heart, book number 4, Sea of Sands, will be out on January 22nd. The 4th book in the Hero Line series will be out on January 24th. The 3rd book in the Magi series will be out on February the 6th, called Skull and Thrones. On February the 10th, it'll be An Equation with One Unknown, Invasion, book number 2. And February 29th, Gods of Ash and Amber, the 4th book in the Seeds of Chaos series. So there you go. On to the new releases and reviews. And first up this week is going to be Ether Collapse, book number 2, Excise, written by Ryan DeBrun. It is 445 pages, $5.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. Otherworldly invasions, nuclear meltdowns converted to dark power, a quest assigned by the planet itself. 3 weeks ago, the world started anew as buildings literally stood up. Fearsome monsters materialize and humanity's way of life changed forever. Now, Rockland Barclay must continue to protect his people from a new threat while dealing with an internal issues that keep popping up. For instance, will he choose to heed the warning of his resurrected ancestral guide as she notices the edges of an ancient conspiracy? Things take a turn for the worse thanks to a freshly awakened god, or was it the fearsome evolution of Earth's wildlife? Regardless of the cause, the group discovers something dark and twisted in the Atlantean system, invited by a recent unmanned nuclear catastrophe. The apocalypse isn't over, it's just luring everyone into a false sense of security. So there we go. This is an entertaining story. I enjoyed book number 1. I like book number 2 a little bit less, but it was still entertaining. And that's mostly because this story in book 2 takes more of a fantasy turn and kind of loses that urban apocalypse vibe from book 1 that I really enjoyed. There are still moments in the story also where it feels like the story is making up a solution to a problem instead of using the existing structure that it's already been described from the RPG mechanics. And that's just something you got to accept if you're going to enjoy this at all. The story, game mechanic wise, adds town building as the refugees from book 1 make it to the place where they can build a community. There's also an expansion of those mechanics in like this RTS fashion with bonuses and special abilities that need to build more advanced structure. So there's a whole like real-time strategy community building aspect, which I thought was fun and interesting and a nice addition to the story. There's also a dungeon to manage, dungeon diving to do, resource gathering, and of course the normal XP grinding and action adventure stuff that was enjoyable from book 1. In this particular in the story is actually expanding in a lot of ways. It's not just these small little groups anymore that were in book 1, which I to a degree I enjoyed. The story is expanding to several thousand characters or 1,000 people as these communities coming together, and the refugees from the town they'd liberated are going to this safe area. And so there's going to be internal conflicts, and there's also conflicts with other sentient species that have popped up on the world, and new powers, and there's dungeons to fight, and of course like a bunch of good action. Overall, entertaining story. I did think that the cliffhanger ending was a bit wannabe, which is again one of those things like, oh, the story is just kind of making something up at the last minute to make it interesting, to return a plot point. I'm like, yeah. It didn't ruin the story for me, but again, it did drop my entertainment a little bit. So for me, the story gets a score of 7.5 out of 10. That's a real right in the middle of enjoyment. That's 7.5 out of 10 for Excise, a post-apocalyptic LitRPG, Ether Collapse book number 2. Okay, next we have Avatar of Light, Interworld Network book number 2, written by Dmitry Bilik. It is 511 pages. It is $5.99. And it is not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Sergei managed to lay his hands on the divine avatar of Savior, which brings with it the kind of new abilities other players can only dream of. Still, it's not the right moment to relax and go with the flow. 2 of his friends have been captured, the third one is being kept hostage while Sergei is forced to procure the elixir of power. And just to add insult to injury, Sergei is on the radar of Morbihan, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and their future doesn't bode well for Sergei. Full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. This review for the novel, it's a Russian translation, so be aware that there are tiny little translation issues occasionally, but overall it's a pretty good translation. But the review for this is a lot like book number 1, and that's because basically it's a slice of life story. It's very enjoyable, but it's very slice of life. There's lots more action adventure, I think, compared to book number 1. Like the story really just started with like an actiony intro. And it feels a little more, I don't want to say sci-fi, like sci-fi fantasy, like maybe sci-fantasy, because there's a lot of like world hopping, and you have more mysterious figures with different powers coming into the story. And the RPG stuff is still relatively light. That's not really the big focus. It's more of like a way to show the power growth, them having skill growth, different magical abilities with descriptions and such. The story is a little more spellish, and the main character gets more spells to use. But the mini time travel aspect is still the most interesting part of the story. If you don't remember what that was from book 1, the main character has the ability to rewind time a few seconds. And so there's this, it allows the main character essentially to die repeatedly, get trapped or make mistakes and not be the end of the story. It's a very interesting way to kind of show the flaws of the main character and show his character growth as he gets into these really tough situations and finds a way out, because he can, anytime he gets into trouble or gets in a fight or gets killed, essentially, he can rewind time and go back and try to redo things where those negative consequences don't hit, or to win the fight, right? And it's a fun little device. It's used well, I think. Sometimes it's kind of a MacGuffin to get him out of a particularly untenable situation, but it's a different way of storytelling, so I like it. On that note, the cliffhanger at the end of book 1 absolutely resolved in the first little bit of the story. Kind of unsatisfyingly. I was expecting something, I don't know, more majestic or something more, epic. So it was a slightly disappointing, in that. But thankfully, the end of book 2 doesn't have that kind of cliffhanger. It's a very well managed kind of ending for this book. So there you go. For me, get to score 7.2 out of 10. That's Avatar of Light, Interworld Network, book number 2. Enjoyed it, but it's not my favorite Russian transition novel. But still, had a fine time with it. And next we have The Card Job, a LitRPG heist novel written by Kit Falbo. It is 154 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Limited, and here is the author's description. A gambler always keeps their cards close to their chest. In the immersive gaming changing worlds, there is a galaxy of possibilities, gunfights, arena battles, intergalactic warfare, adult pleasures, and pure escapism. Hermanos Granger plays for the paper. The change set a minigame using card akin to those introduced to him in his youth. A quest in the cards brings him back to a relationship he thought was buried, and now he has a job to do. The Card Job. That sounds a lot dirtier than it's probably meant to be. This is from the author of The Crafting of Chess, which is actually a story that I really enjoyed. I liked it a lot. But I didn't like this one as much, and that's unfortunate. There are some regular technical writing errors in the story that bugged me. And so it was, and then, like I said, usually they don't. Usually, like, my brain could ignore them for some reason in this story. My brain just kept seeing them, and it kept like stopping my flow of reading, which is an issue for me. Additionally, the story it kind of feels more game-lit than LitRPG, and there are RPG mechanics there. There's levels and classes and stats and all that good stuff. But there's very little RPG progression since many of the main characters are at the game's level cap. And the story is more focused on the puzzle aspect of the card thing and the in-game heist more than anything else. And the story though is set in a virtual reality world that is like a full-on MMO, and there's plenty of like class ability to describe. So like some RPG mechanics here. It's just that there's no real RPG progression, which is why I say it kind of feels more a little like game, which is perfectly fine. Just be aware of that going into it. Story-wise, I actually really like the idea of a virtual reality heist. It's a fun idea. I just haven't seen it done well very often, because those are very competing ideas of like, a good heist film and a good heist story versus a good little RPG story. They don't always mesh well or easily together. In this particular case, it wasn't the heist itself. It was actually more the characters that kind of turned me off. The main character, he just felt like too big of a pushover. And I genuinely dislike the ex-girlfriend he brings into the story to help him out, which is probably her role, but still, I didn't like either character. And I was kind of ambivalent about all the other people on the heist team, which kind of makes the story hard to enjoy when you don't like the characters in particular. It's hard to root for them. It's hard to like get invested in their success or their failure or the tensions. And so while the story isn't terrible by any means, the characters just didn't work for me. So I had a hard time enjoying the story. And that's just me. For me, it gets score 6.6 out of 10 rather. That's The Card Job by LitRPG Heist. It didn't work for me, but I say give it a chance. And go watch a sample, listen to read a sample, see if you enjoy it. Okay, next we have the System Apocalypse Short Story Anthology Volume 1, a LitRPG post-apocalyptic fantasy and science fiction anthology. That is definitely the longest title I've read, I think, ever for a story. There's a ton of authors here, Tao Wong being the main author and the person who's compiling it and had put out the notice for an anthology collection and set in his universe. But there's stories from Alexis Keene, Craig Hamilton, Ix Fion, L.A. Bat, R.K. Billio. So all kinds of good authors there. The total story is a total of 378 pages, $4.99, so it is available on Kindle Limited. I'll read the novel description for the anthology as a whole. A bounty hunting survivor, a galactic dark elf, a woman who has given up her humanity becomes something more. These stories are more available in the first short story anthology for the System Apocalypse, covering year one of Earth. When the world ends, humanity steps up, finding new ways to survive in a world of classes, magic, and monsters. The anthology features exciting new stories by 5 new writers and a new, never publicly released short story by Tao Wang. So there we go. And each one of the short stories actually has a novel description in the description there, but I'm just not going to read all of them there because there are so many. Okay, my review for the anthology as a whole, I'll give you that first, and then I'll give you the individual reviews for each of the short stories. On the whole, anthologies are generally kind of a mixed bag. You may love some of the short stories, you may hate others. To me, though, I've always felt like they were a great chance to see works from different authors. And I personally enjoy them because they have the potential to be like these delightful little story nuggets that I can kind of get through and put down to move on to the next short story. And for me, this is actually one of the best LitRPG short story collections I've had a chance to read. A lot of the time it's like, oh, some of these are really great. And some of them are like, oh, some of these aren't even LitRPG. And that's just kind of par for the course for me so far. But this one, the Tao Wang made such an effort to make things coherent because they're all set in his same universe. And I think part of the reason that this kind of works is because of the setting itself. Like the System Apocalypse universe kind of has this real flexible RPG system, this real flexible way that it's applied to people and commit such a variety of classes that you can get a lot of freshness. Even if you're not focusing on the system RPG mechanics themselves, it's not super challenging to weave in the RPG mechanics and still be faithful to like the mechanics of the world. And I think that's something in favor of the author and the way he's kind of set up his world. For me, overall, the novel gets a score of 7.7 out of 10. It's a really one of the best LitRPG anthologies I think I've ever read. And hopefully we'll get some more chances to compare it to other things. But for now, this is definitely one of the best ones. Moving on to the individual reviews, I have for intermissions. There are actually 7 intermissions in the story. And these are like these little... It's like only like a couple pages and they take place between each short story. And I thought that was like a real interesting way to spread like this cohesive short story throughout the novel that acknowledges each of the short stories around. So like there will be a short story and then the intermission between will actually acknowledge the short story that just came forward saying, oh, and well, I'm not going to spoil for you, but it'll actually acknowledge it. And that acknowledgement really kind of created a cohesion for the entire anthology that really added to making this, instead of just like a random collection of stories, like one cohesive kind of concept. So I thought it was really nice of that. So for me, it gets a score of 7.6 out of 10 for the intermissions on the whole. Moving on to the first short story, I should say. Hunting Monsters by Craig Hamilton. This was actually the best short story in the anthology for me. And I thought it was great because it's about a bounty hunter that survives the system apocalypse initiation and is on the trail of a system-powered serial killer. So it's like this detective story. And it's one of the few stories that I've read that combines the detective genre with LitRPG well. I've read several other attempts, and it's just... Like I said, the mixing genres sometimes is really challenging because each has their own expectations. And it's not always easy to fulfill both of them without sacrificing something for the other. And this one just maybe is because it was a short story, so there's not a lot of expectation for RPG progression. But it did a perfect balance, and I really enjoyed it. Gets a score of 8 out of 10 for me. The next short story is Tooth and Claw by Alexis Keene. It's an interesting short story about a dog who gets system powers and tries to find his human. And it's adorable and it's lovely. It's probably a little longer than it probably needs to be. But it had nice action, and it's told from the dog's point of view the entire way through. I had a nice time with it. Gets a score of 7.4 out of 10. After that, it was Debts and Dances by Tao Wang himself, the author of the System Apocalypse series. It's a short story about Lord Roxley. A day before the system is established on Earth, dances and dangers abound as he makes plans to stake a claim on Earth. The story has a familiar character that was nice to learn more about, and it ties perfectly with the main series without actually spoiling anything. So really nicely done. Score 7.6 out of 10. Rebellion Within by Ixfian. Or Phoenix, if you just reword things. It was actually very interesting to have a non-binary main character. And a story that dealt with the prejudices of the community and those seeking to take advantage of this person. I thought it was the most interesting when it kind of stuck to that plotline though. And it felt the most genuine. And unfortunately, the story kind of meandered a little bit. Like it didn't stick to that plot line enough for me. And so it went and did some action stuff and it did some XP grinding stuff and it just kind of lost me a little bit before returning to that main plot line. It just meandered a little bit too much for me for a short story. It's actually like 20% of the entire novel, which tells you it's a good chunk of the story. And for a short story, it's just a little bit too slice of life for me. So it kind of lost me. It gets a score of 6 out of 10. After that, it was Overture to Oblivion by L.A. Bat. It's a really good short story, to be honest. It's about a system apocalypse set in New Zealand, told from the Maori perspective. There's really nice cultural development, clear and concise background stories, unique classes and powers, and I like the action. I really enjoyed it a lot because it gave me a glimpse into a location and a place and cultures that I haven't been exposed to before. It's so fresh and interesting, and I really enjoyed it. It gets a score of 7.8 out of 10. And last is Phoenix Rising by R.K. Bilial. It is, this one was a little mixed for me. It's a story about, a middle-aged man who has dementia, and he survives his system apocalypse, and because of his condition, he actually gets bound to a phoenix who gives him a class that lets him be reborn. So if he's about to die, or he can do this voluntarily, he can instead be reborn in a fiery explosion that can harm his enemies. And it actually the ability to actually create an entirely new body based upon that based upon his memories. So it ends up kind of turning the main character into several versions of his past self, him being a teenager, him being a slightly older version of himself. And I thought it was a neat premise, but it got a little annoying because I kind of had to get to know the main character again and again and again as his memories kind of fractured and shifted. And he didn't really remember things that had already occurred. So for him, we kind of got explanations again for system abilities, and his abilities were different every time as a subclass. And so I thought it was neat, and overall, on the whole, it's still an interesting story. I kind of found the need to get to know the main character again a little bit annoying. It felt like in a way that the main character was almost schizophrenic, or like he had multiple personalities. And it kind of made it challenging to connect to him because he felt like a different person every time this ability went off, which is kind of the point, I guess. But it just made it hard for me to get to know the character. Still, entertaining story overall, gets a score of 7.1 out of 10. So there we go for it. So again, overall, the entire anthology gets a score of 7.7 out of 10. I had a really good time with it. That's System Apocalypse Short Story Anthology Volume 1. I'm not going to say the rest. With the score of 7.7 out of 10. Okay, next we have Awaken Online Ember in the Tarot series, book number 1. It is 433 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. Desert Sands, Arcane Magic, A Love Lost. Finn Harris should have been the one to die, but he wasn't. His wife took his place. What was worse, he only had himself and his company to blame. They let their passion outpace their prudence, determined to revolutionize the world. While all innovation comes with a price, he never imagined it would cost him Rachel. Nearly a decade later, Finn is content to hold himself up and wait out the rest of his life, what little he has left. That is, until his daughter intervenes, forcing him out of his grief and into a new virtual reality game developed by his old employer. They're calling it Awaken Online. And she believes there's something unusual going on inside the game. And since Finn knows the company, knows their tactics, she might be right. Finn wasn't sure what he expected to find when he logged in, but it certainly wasn't a manipulative fire god or school for mages, where the students are pitted against each other in a deadly duels and the faculty isn't shy about maiming or injuring novice mages to a point. Now Finn must learn to fight, for his own life and for a chance at redemption. He'll need to prove that his fire hasn't been snuffed out, that there's still an ember burning. So there you go. Short review. I've always enjoyed anything from the author, from Travis Bagwell, as a really good writer. I've enjoyed all of his stories. This is a story set in the Awaken Online universe, but that's about as connected as the other. There's one character that you see like kind of a crossover with, but she's not the main character from the main series, so don't worry about that. Otherwise, this is a complete independent series with a different main character. Unlike everything else that's come from Travis Bagwell, this is good writing. It's engaging characters. There's nice character development. There's action, adventure, RPG progression galore, and all the stuff you've come to enjoy from the Awaken Online universe. So I enjoyed it immensely. So it gets a score of 7.8 out of 10 for me. Easy review. That's Awaken Online Ember Tarot with a score of 7.8 out of 10. And next up, folks, we got Ian's Picks of the Week. This is a segment of the show where I, Mitchell, a longtime LitRPG community member who reads and reviews just as much as me, and he's nice enough to agree to put some reviews out for us for the show and for our database of LitRPG reviews. We have a couple reviews for him. We're going to start off with the This Broken Sword TOL Online Episode Number 1, a LitRPG saga, and it really bugs me. It truly does that in this title it says it spells LitRPG LIT space RPG. One word, just saying. Okay, this is Ian's review is really simple. It says Hunter is as Grinder. That's part of his title though. He gives it a score as 8.2 out of 10. He says for novella, it does a decent job of establishing the main character and gets her in the game, where she has some decent NPC interactions. She doesn't talk much to humans. I enjoyed and would gladly read more episodes. So he enjoyed it immensely. Gives a score at 8.2 out of 10. I'm actually going to be reviewing this next week. It was on my list already. And so I'll be reviewing as well. But that is Ian's review. He also reviewed Awaken Online, Ember, which we've already reviewed in the podcast, but his review, even if it was different, we would still show it because it's always nice to have different people's perspectives. He says, great start. I'd like to see more of these. I like seeing hints regarding the genesis of AO, not quite as rich as the other AO stories. I still thought it was a satisfying read. Has an older, disabled, depressed main character, reminding me some of Continue Online. I like seeing more of the magic mechanics. Score of 8.7 out of 10. So he liked this one even more. He also reviewed, there we go, Civ CEO, a 4X lit series, The Accidental Champion book number one. I actually remember, I think there's another series called The Accidental Champion. So hopefully you don't get confused. But he says, well, it's civilization. Mostly a trader, willing and dealing, and a bit of problem solving along the way. A pretty good read. The main character is a loner, and there really isn't much character development. He gives it a score of 7.7 out of 10, which is fairly critical for Ian, who generally gives positive reviews. I've actually taken a look at Civ CEO. I don't think it was actually... It's definitely gamelit. I didn't read enough to it to give back an opinion that's fully formed. There are some game mechanic elements, of course, throughout the entire thing. I don't think there is actual RPG progression for the main character though. So I could be mistaken. This could be totally weird. But I haven't read it, so that's why we have Ian here to help tell us what is LitRPG, what he enjoys, what he doesn't, and he gives it a score of 7.7 out of 10. So there we go. Okay, folks, that's it. The show is done. Thanks everyone for listening, for hanging out with us. Remember, you can always follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, and our own webpage at litrpgpodcast.com. No, really, go like us on Facebook, please, and on Twitter and YouTube. We actually give you a bunch of ways to communicate with the show, and we have a nice LitRPG community there who comments on the reviews and gives opinions and disagrees, and perfectly fine. We have nice conversations. Of course, you get the chance to watch the podcast every single week while you're scrolling through Facebook or Twitter. So all kinds of great places. Of course, we have links in the show notes for a bunch of other great LitRPG communities, LitRPG Books, LitRPG Society, the Fantasy Nation, and of course, Will Write Readers. And of course, if you want to support the podcast in any way, shape, or form and help keep us free and ad-free, you can find out all the ways to support us at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to watch me and to hear me talk about LitRPG, the genre that I love, and for having a shared interest. I know it takes your time, and I appreciate that. So until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.